Token Theater Friends. I'm Jose, and today I'm here with one of my favorite directors, honestly, and I think bona fide genius. Welcome, Sammi Cannold or Sammi Cannold.
Thank you.
Such a joy to have you here because I have like a gazillion questions because you are working on so many things at the moment. Like right now, for instance, you have Endlings at your theater workshop running through March.
Yes.
And then you're also working on your first opera.
Yes.
With Carmen at Lincoln Center. So let's get started with Endlings, I guess. In our previous episode, we had Celine's song and Wai Jing Ho, one of the stars. And whenever I see one of your shows, especially, I often wonder, the moment when you get that script and you open it and you read it, when do you know what the show will look like?
I think that to me, when I read a script and I can see it in my head or like some version of it in my head, that's when I know that I should try to be considered to direct it.
Oh, wow.
Where it's like a script like Endlings I read and like saw the whole thing in my head, or at least with semblance of what I thought it looked like. And then sometimes scripts I read, I'm like, this is genius, but I don't, my brain doesn't gravitate towards how to visualize it and how to bring it to life. So in that case, it's really about that initial impulse of visualization. And for me with Endlings, it was about, because the show's about Korean freedivers, it was about what it looks like to see their work underwater. And of course, that's not the whole show, it's really only 7 minutes of the show, but it was sort of the key to unlocking a lot of other things in the show for me directorially.
That's so impressive. So like, I mean, I don't want to get like all like metaphysical and stuff, but in a way it sounds like the projects that pick you.
I sort of feel that way. I mean, but in a non-pompous way, hopefully, but it's just that it's about clicking. That it's like, it's never a personal thing about who's working on it. I mean, sometimes you're like, oh, I would love to work with that person or something like that, but to me it's really like, am I so grabbed by the story that I can envision it as I'm reading or as I'm listening or something like that. Or sometimes somebody will say like, I'm writing a musical about this, and then you're like, I know what that looks like. Or you think you know what it looks like, and then it changes 57 times and you have designers who tell you what it looks like, but I think that initial kernel is like so key for me.
So do you remember, because I was not expecting the answer, so do you remember then, what were the images that, that first came to mind when you're thinking about like Evita or Ragtime? And we're gonna get deeper into those later, but I would just love to know about that first impression that you had.
Yeah, I think that like in those cases, because they're pre-existing shows that I grew up on, the like visualization of what they could look like was really the moment where I was like, oh, I think I should try to direct a production now. Because like when I was, the Ragtime idea came about because I was excited about site-specific musical theater and made a list of all musicals that could be performed site-specifically and where they could be performed. And when I got to that pairing, and I was like, where could Ragtime be? What are the sites in Ragtime? And it was like that, like Jimmy Neutron brain blast moment where you're like, oh, Ellis Island. And immediately I knew what that looked like in my head. And I think I understood what the experience of that would be. And similarly with Evita, it was like when I read in an autobiography, or a biography, she did not write it, about trauma in Ava's life as a teenager, that was the moment where I was like, oh, I see two women on stage figuring out what this age difference means. So for me, it's a lot of like click moments of instinctively knowing when an idea is like the right one to pursue somehow, or at least the right one to pursue as a starting point.
Is there a classic show maybe that you would love to direct at some point, but you haven't found that click?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think to me it's shows that I've seen like genius productions of that I can't think of how I could do better, in a way that, like, I love Pippin, but to me Diane Paul's production is everything. So I've now had a click moment where I was like, oh, this would be my way of doing it differently. Or like Billy Elliot, I like loved that production, I love that show, but I can't figure out how I would do it in a way that is not just striving for the same thing that production aimed for. But maybe one day it'll just land.
Maybe one day, yeah.
Yeah.
I love, for instance, what you did with Evita, which ran at City Center last year, and you were a big fan of anything related to that musical, and I loved how your production was a combination of, you know, honoring and a tribute to the original production, but also it had like such like the, you know, like the Sammi stamp. And is there any way that you can maybe explain to me how you achieved that balance? Because, you know, it was both something of the past, but also a production of the future. Like, if we see more Evitas, I want them to be your Evita.
Thanks. We had so many conversations about Evita, and it was like so beautiful to talk about it. I think that to me, when I'm given the opportunity to approach a piece of work that already exists and has already had productions that are brilliant, it's about what it means to tell the story now and in the given place that I'm given the opportunity to tell it. Because, like, for example, doing Ragtime on Ellis Island was about the space. Like, I loved the original Broadway production, right? So it wasn't about trying to go better than it, because I don't, it's just time and place, right? Like, and with Evita, it was, what does it mean to tell this story now? Like, Hal Prince's production is everything to me, but that was 40 years ago. So, you know, I think considering what that material means in this day and age is a gift that directors get to play with. And, you know, we're particularly lucky in the case of something like Evita that the writers are with us and are eager for interpretations that respond to the time and place that we're in, and are supportive. And I think that's beautiful. I don't think it works with every show, but I got lucky with, you know, the few existing shows that I've directed in the past few years.
You grew up in New York, and you grew up surrounded by theater.
Yes.
But when and how did you know that you wanted to become a director? Like, was there ever a moment when that, you know, what a director does was nebulous, and then you were like, oh, this is what I want to do?
Yeah. My parents told me that when I was a toddler, like, my favorite thing to do was put on shows with little hotel shampoo bottles. You know, like the mini shampoo bottles.
That's so cute.
Where's Sammy? Like, she's at the bathroom counter, like, putting on shows with shampoo bottles. So they claim, like, they knew when I was 2, and I was like, yeah, right. Like, that's funny. But I had a bizarre experience when I was a teenager where I was in a summer program or like a summer camp in my town, and we were doing a production of Joseph. And the director of the program was like covering for a lot of people who were out, so he would leave the room, and because I happened to be the oldest, I was 13, he would say, Sammy's in charge, and just leave the room. And it forced me to like learn what directing was. If you're listening, I'm doing air quotes. But because I had to tell the other kids where to go. And I think that it was such a bizarre experience to have at 13, because directing's not something that's taught in middle school, but he ended up crediting me as the director of that production. I got paid $1,000. I was 13. It was like, I was just like, and then the next year he hired me again, and the next year again. So I'm sure the work was terrible. In fact, I know it because I watched it, and I don't really consider it to be directing. But I think the inkling that was something that I could do at that age, or, you know, the inkling at that age that was something that I could do eventually, was really meaningful. And I think, like, the ultimate click moment for me was when I was a freshman in college. I went to go see the Broadway revival of Pippin, and I was turned around in my seat at intermission, and I saw Diane Paulus in the back of the house, and there was something to me about seeing the person whose brain this version of the show came from that sort of aligned everything about what I wanted to do. Because I was like, oh, there's a human who had this idea and then made it happen, and she's right there, and I look a little bit like her, so like this is an achievable goal, you know, and so that was sort of my like aha moment.
How would you define directing when someone asks you what do you do and they have no idea, maybe they've never seen a show before, or they've never seen a movie or a TV show, like how do you explain what directing is?
I'm so bad at this. Because it's so many different things at so many different stages. But I think that to me, I'm stealing this from someone, I don't remember. But it's you are responsible for being the creator of the event in the way that like if the writer or writers are responsible for being the creators of the script, you are responsible for the time that people spend with your story. And so that it covers so many different things, from like how the story is staged, to the acting, to dramaturgical support of the writers, to figuring out what the like holistic experience of coming to the theater that night is, you know, like, so all of those things. But I think also, you know, I'm lucky to get to work in a bunch of different like mediums in terms of theater, and then like theater adjacent mediums, and the description of the job changes depending on any given project at any given time, which is an exciting thing to me because you get to, you know, flex different muscles.
What's the most underrated part about being a director?
Oh gosh, I think probably the community. Like you just don't, and I feel this more so on musicals than on plays, but it's such a gift to have a job where you are required to collaborate very intensely every day. And I really felt this like to the max on Evita, because it was really like all my closest friends in theater working on that show together. Not all of them, but like a group of my closest friends working together. And it was like we were just coming to hang out, but we were making art and we were being paid for it. So it was like, it was kind of amazing that like when you love your job that much, you don't think about it as a job anymore.
I agree.
Yeah. Like you go to theater every night. That's incredible.
I know what you're talking about. And you know, that's so beautiful, because like, you know, like I'm gonna officially name it like the Cannold crew. And you know, we have someone like Jason Sherwood, who's such a genius.
Such a genius.
His work in Evita, I just walked in and I just saw the flowers and I was like, holy shit. And then he also designed Endlings, for instance.
Yeah.
How do you how do you know when you found the collaborators that you want to be creating that art with?
I think you know when you're in the trenches, because it's like Endlings and Evita were both hard shows. Like everything Jason and I have done together has been hard in one way or another. It's not been like, all right, that's done, you know. Either because of, in the case of Evita, the very tight time schedule in which we were making it. In the case of Endlings, you know, putting a pool on stage, among other things. And I think you learn a lot about if you are good collaborators when you are faced with like crises, or theatrical crises. And if you're responding with the same level of like calm and creativity, I think to me that's a vibing thing. But he and I were friends I think this is a pretty common denominator of like my collaborations that like in most cases we were friends before we started working together. So we had a foundation of like going to diners and talking about art that we could base our work off of. And I've had some amazing collaborations that have just started at the moment of collaboration, but I think that like in the case of Jason and like in the case of Bradley King who lit both Evita and Endlings, he was the lighting designer on Great Comet and I was the associate director, and so got to know him for years as somebody who was like passing on the notes, you know, and that was so meaningful to me because we had a working relationship. It was a very different working relationship, but it meant that when we started working together as designer and director, we could hit the ground running in a way that we already had a language, we already knew and respected each other, and so that was helpful.
You're about to tackle your very first opera, and you're doing Carmen, which is like, you know, one of the most iconic. Sorry, I don't want to like put pressure on you.
No, I could put the pressure on myself.
What are you doing, Carmen? Like, I'm so excited.
You know, it's funny because I've never directed opera before. I came in sort of with the perspective that like, and also this opera is it's for one night. It's at Rose Hall at Lincoln Center. It's with Master Voices, and we tech, dress, and do the show all on the same day. So,
Oh my God.
yeah. When they asked me to do it, I was like, what an amazing opportunity. Like, I really want to start working in opera. But just making sure we're all on the same page that like, I've never done this before. And this is like a very fast process. And they were so game and wonderful about it. But I think, you know, much of the work that I've done in theater to this point has been, for better or worse, like pretty concept-y, in that there's been like a very clear sort of version of it. Like in the log line, you can say like, you know, this is the violet that was on a bus, you know? and I was like pretty specific with them up front that I was like, I just want to be honest, like I don't think this is going to be like the Carmen that did this, because I just want to stage it and tell the story in a way that like makes sure that I am serving the building blocks before I try to get fancy, because I don't know this art form. I like go see it, I respect it, but I don't know if I'll be any good at it. And I think that I'm very grateful that as an institution, they were like, that's totally cool. It's one night, like, you know, stage it and tell the story, and you know, don't worry about concept. So I'm grateful for that.
In which ways, if any, would you say that approaching an opera is different than approaching like a Broadway musical?
Well, I think language is the first one. So like we're doing the Sheldon Harnick English translation, which I'm very grateful for because I don't speak French. So I guess, but what's tricky about it is there's no recording of the English translation. So I have to listen to the French recording and then understand where what the English is. So it's almost just as hard. We ended up making a sort of like dummy recording to use, but it's been hard to adjust to that, because, and I really don't know how directors who do operas in languages they don't speak crack them, because I don't know how I would coach acting if I didn't, or not coach acting, but in opera essentially coach acting, if you don't know what every word means. And I guess part of what I'm learning is that like directors of opera and conductors of opera know every word, like, or at least like Ted Sperling, who I'm working with, who is conducting the opera and he runs the organization. He knows what all of Carmen is, and he's never done it in English before. So I really feel the steep learning curve of it, and I'm trying to, you know, catch up as much as I can. But I think my other concern is that, you know, my training is to fill every beat in the way of, in musical theater, you know, nobody just stands there for 5 minutes unless it's like a very specific singular number. But in opera that happens all the time. So my impulse is always to make something more complex, and I don't think opera wants that. So I'm trying to like play with the push and pull of where my instincts are and where the art form is, which is hard.
That's really fascinating. So basically, do not expect, if you go to Carmen, do not expect like singing bulls.
Yeah, no,
Right.
we have a dancing bull. Dancing bull, but no singing bulls.
I just thought about the fact that Carmen, in many ways, joins this collection almost of, you know, thinking about like the mom in Ragtime, or thinking about Violet, who's like a very shy, insecure woman who has to find herself in a way.
Yeah.
And even thinking about what you did with Evita. And Carmen is joining this family almost of unsung, no pun intended, unsung heroines who you're giving them the opportunity to reclaim the narrative of the shows that they're in. And I wonder, you know, how, if in any way this is going to come into effect in Carmen. And since I just thought about this, can you talk about a little bit about more, maybe it's an unconscious choice to give this, or it might be a conscious choice, which, I don't know, to give this women, these female characters, like the opportunity to like hold their narratives and be like, bye men.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because when you know, in like panels on female directors, there are all these conversations about what does it mean for a show to be directed by a woman. And to me, it's that like, I don't think I'm setting out to direct a feminist production of Carmen, and yet every choice will naturally be from the perspective of a woman. So I think that naturally it'll just sort of like trend that way. Like, I didn't set out to direct a feminist production of Ragtime, but like the choices that we made probably went more in, it went in a more specific direction because, but I guess like, to me, parts of the opera just jump out in ways that are different. If you think about them through the lens of being a woman, like, you know, at the very end, when she dies, hopefully no spoilers. You know Carmen, you know she dies. But it's so wild to me because the violence sort of comes out of nowhere, and I was thinking about it in relation to like some research I was doing for another project on domestic violence, where I was like, oh, you know, statistics tell us that like in cases of domestic violence, the time when a woman or a victim of any gender is most likely to be killed is when they are closest to freedom.
Oh my God.
Yeah, which is like the moment where they are about to be free is the moment where they are most likely to be killed. And I was like, oh, actually, I think that's sort of Carmen's journey, where it's like she, over the course of the opera, goes on this process of like coming into her deep desire for freedom, and then at the end of the opera, when she's essentially attained it, that's when you know, this crazy man kills her. Yeah, but I think, not to say that like you know, a male or non-binary director wouldn't notice those things, but I think that like I'm probably more likely to than the average director because I spend more time thinking about it.
Mm. I always loathe to ask, you know, female artists and women about, you know, what's it like being a woman and all that stuff. Because I don't think journalists give women and underrepresented people in the arts enough time to talk about craft, and we're always just talking about representation and all that. But I do have to ask about, you know, thinking about just what happened, and now I'm dating the show, what happened this week where we saw, you know, the most competent women that the Democratic Party had to offer, not the most competent women, the most competent person.
Yeah.
She had plans for everything, and we saw how the country just turned her, you know, their back on her.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, you know, this theater is so male-dominated still, and there's like a handful.
So what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a handful of directors directors like Diane Paulus, you mentioned, Pam McKinnon, and Rachel Chapkin, obviously. But there's like a handful of women who get the opportunity to work in directing. And have you noticed, the field in a way changing and being more receptive and maybe not focusing so much on a person's gender and their sex and just instead saying this is the best person for this work and for this piece?
I wish. Part of me wonders if like the focus on gender is what's needed to get over the hurdle so that it then becomes the norm. It's like the way that people talk about post-racial casting, right? If like we need to talk about it now so that in 20 years we don't have to talk about it, but I feel it a lot because it's like 90% of the conversations that I have about projects include the phrase we're looking for a female director or something like that. And on the one hand, I'm thrilled that people are looking for women, but sometimes don't really know what that means, and sometimes get concerned that it's a box checking mechanism. Because there are so many female directors, maybe not like who are getting to work on Broadway, but there's so many female directors who are ready, that it feels like, I feel that when like, if I end up in a conversation about like directing a Shakespeare play, I've never directed Shakespeare, I'm probably very bad at it, and it feels like sometimes we need a woman, I've heard of a woman, come here, whereas we would never, you wouldn't go to Jerry Mitchell and say, come direct this Shakespeare play, unless he like had a specific interest in Shakespeare plays, right? So I think that there's a lack of nuance in the way that like hiring female directors and directors of color is approached in a way, in some cases. I hope that doesn't sound snooty, but I find that like there's so much nuance in being like, that's the right male director for that piece, or that's what really, we have such a good sense of what our male directors are good at, but I don't know that applies as much to women as I would hope.
Although personally, and I'm very, very biased, so I'm sorry for saying this out loud, although I would want to see a Sammi Cannold version of every single show, every single musical probably. Because I've also noticed that theater tends to be also like very like checkboxy, like okay, we have Sammi now, we don't need to think about mentoring and training and welcoming other young women directors. And I wonder, if you have any, now this is like my Oprah moment, if you have any words of encouragement for so many, I know so many young women who admire you so much and they're always like asking, like if you meet her, ask her this and this and this, and what words of encouragement will you have for them?
Yeah. I'd say, just to go back to the Shakespeare thing for 1 second, to me there's no problem in somebody saying, I know you don't do Shakespeare, but I think this would be great because this, right? Like, which is different from being like, you're a director, you're a woman, this needs a woman, Shakespeare, right? Like, anyway, that's that. But I feel like, encouragement-wise, I think there's so many amazing young female directors out there, and like more every day, and I'm excited about the work that everybody's doing and think that there's room for all of it, and hope that somehow the issue gets better. I guess I don't claim to know how to fix it beyond the obvious things that everybody's talked about ad nauseum. It was funny, I was asked by a publication to write an article about, like an opinion piece about what it means that there are 5 female directors on Broadway this season. And I went off on this like giant train where I was looking for statistics on the last 10 years to figure out if it has gotten better in any way. Those statistics didn't exist, so I like crunched them over the course of like one very long and sleepless week. And we didn't end up publishing it for complicated reasons, but I am gonna post the statistics so that they're available. And I'm not a statistician by any means, but the trends that are revealed in them are like so heartbreaking, because I crunched the numbers both for female directors and directors of color, and there are no consistent upward trends in the last 10 years in any category, in the way of female directors of plays, directors of color of plays, female directors of musicals, directors of color of musicals. Nothing goes like this. It's all random. And I was like, we started having this conversation prior to 10 years ago, so how is it that nothing has improved in the commercial sphere beyond like this year, which the statistics tell us is a fluke?
I don't know. It makes me think about what happened a few years ago with when Hamilton swept the Tonys, and for the first time there were 4 actors of color who won all the Tonys for musical performances, and then the next year we were back to a whole lineup of white winners basically. It happens at the Oscars, it happens at the Emmys, and there's like this like lack of accountability because something, this like fluke happens, and they're like, oh, we solved it. Let's move on and let's go back to what we were doing before. That's very depressing, Sammy, so thank you for...
I'm so sorry. But I was thinking about it like in relation to like Rachel Chapkin's Tony speech, and I was like, okay, so like if we all listen to Rachel's Tony speech, which I feel like people are, like, and among other things that they're listening to, how long do we listen to it for? Like, and is it just going to be a phase, or can we sustain the trend in some way? Get very excited about this.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, so I don't know, but I mean, so many people are doing their part in spades. Like, you're doing your part in spades. There's so many amazing directors who are mentoring the next generation. I'm the beneficiary of that. Like, but I don't know. So.
Now I want to think about something so random, like an uplifting note.
Sorry.
No. I love all this part because I don't feel like people talk enough about any of this, and everyone's always like, "Oh, theater is so great," and we're all happy, and it's like very Glee Club like.
Yeah.
But in reality, I think we're one of the fields that's most behind when it comes to the arts.
Really, I think so.
Maybe like I don't know, like the like fine arts would also be behind, but theater compared to like film and television, which are already very, very, very depressing.
Yeah, right.
Theater is just like all the way behind. After the run of Endlings at your theater workshop and your Carmen at Lincoln Center, what are you working on next?
I'm developing a bunch of different musicals, which I'm having so much fun doing.
You'll be so happy.
And new musicals, and actually 2 revivals. And we're hoping that there will be a future for the Evita from City Center, so fingers crossed. And I am directing a new musical. The one I'm allowed to talk about is called Joy, and it's a new musical that's there's a movie by the same name that Jennifer Lawrence was in.
You're doing that?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I'm very excited about it, and the other 2 I am not allowed to talk about, but that one I'm so jazzed about, and like it's fun for me because my parents and I joke that it's the first thing I've directed where no one dies. Like it's a very like happy. I mean, like there are dark moments in it, but like it's a feel good musical, and I'm like, wow. And it's funny because my like sweet extended family from Westchester has been so kind and like coming to all my things, and they're like, wow, you're just like so like dark and serious, and I was like, just like, don't come for a while and then come to joy. Like, it's gonna be your thing. It's gonna be so great. I'm really excited about that.
Okay, 2 questions. Who wrote that, and have you met J-Lo?
I have not met her, but I met Joy, the real Joy.
Oh, wow.
Which is great. I'm going to her house on Monday, which is fun, yeah. Anne-Marie Milazzo and Ken Davenport wrote it.
Wow, that's so exciting.
Yeah, and we're doing it with Andy Einhorn, among others. So it's fun, and it's very fast-tracked in the sense that, they started writing it less than a year ago, and we already had a full 20-hour reading. So it's just like boom, boom, boom. In a way that's exciting, because most musicals take like 8 years now. So it's
so
thrilling
exciting.
to be on that.
I'm imagining like this like big miracle mob. Busby, Berkeley, like.
My dogs are named Busby and Berkeley, so not far off. But we're intentionally sort of like keeping the mob imagery out of it. Because it's a show about a mop, but it's a show about way more than a mop.
Right.
Yeah.
Another unsung heroine in a way, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Totally unsung heroine, and a woman who like really carved out a path for herself in business where one did not exist. I admire her so much, and I'm excited to be telling her story.
She has like dozens of patents, right? Because she just kept creating and inventing things that were not around before she was.
I was when I started working on it, I like looked in my closet and I was like, oh, I've been using her huggable hangers my entire life.
Wow, I love that. And one of my favorite Sammi Cannold facts is how incredible you are at collecting Evita Memorabilia. And I had a chance to see all these things that I keep telling everyone, and then I saw this book that they gave the kids, and they had to read about everyone and all of that. And last year I asked you if you had a favorite piece, and you didn't have one, and I was just wondering if by now you have an absolute favorite piece of Evita Memorabilia that you own.
Oh gosh. That book that we looked at, it's a textbook from 1951 that the kids would use in schools that was like all propaganda, as you said. That's probably my favorite. I gave away some of my memorabilia. I know. It was because it felt like such a good gift to people. I gave one thing to Tim Rice because it felt meaningful. And then some to a few of the folks who worked on the show. But antiquing in Argentina was very meaningful to me. But yeah, I think it's it falls into the category of things that are like historical related to the subject matter, and then there was so much around the production of that show that was so meaningful to me, like talking to the writers was such a meaningful facet of that, and getting to do the show in New York, and the photos of the show mean a lot to me, because sometimes I think about it as it was so fast that I forget that it happened, but it did. So.
Sammi, it's always such a joy talking to you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me. This is such a treat. As a listener, I'm jazzed.
Thank you so much, Sammi.
Thank you.
And remember, theater is way more fun when you bring a friend.
Fine.